Well, hello everybody, and I hope you've all had an absolutely brilliant day of Wonkfestery so far. If you're not already exhausted with the buzz of new ideas and insights, this is the session about the UPP Foundation Student Futures Commission, which is my absolute privilege to chair. Now, before I introduce my fellow travellers on this session, can I just say a huge thank you to the UPP Foundation for supporting the Commission, and also to our wonderful partners, Shakespeare Martineau, Group GTI, and of course our very own Wonky. Now, this is a really important event for the Commission, because here we are with our Student Futures community. You're all a bunch of people who really care about students and who, I think, like me, recognise that university students have had pretty rotten time during the pandemic. And I hope you agree that they really deserve our attention and focus on trying to make sure that nothing that's happened in the last 15 months should hold them back from having a successful, fulfilling and life-defining time at university from now on. And so our commission is about mobilising the whole sector to share and to promulgate our thinking about what students will want and what they'll need when they get back to some kind of normality in September. In some ways, it's a kind of continuation of the whole Build Back Higher that this festival is about. Now, I've got three of my brilliant commissioners here this evening to help us think things through. First of all, Colin Bailey is president and principal of Queen Mary University in London. Colin, I've got a question for you. Are you the only vice chancellor in the country who left school at 16 and started your career as an apprentice engineer?
I think so, yes. I haven't heard any other vice chancellors that went down that route. So yes, I left school at 16. I was not interested in education at that time. Could not wait to leave school, and luckily managed to get an apprenticeship, but they released a night school.
Fantastic. I'd love to hear some other time what kind of drew you back into academia. But do you want to just say a couple of words about why you think the Student Futures Commission is important?
Yes, very much so. So thank you, Mary. I mean, this is very important to obviously learn about what's happened over the last 15 months. What we can learn from that, but also looking forward to making sure that we can make sure that we fill the gaps, if you like, of the education that perhaps we missed out on, and the experience and the social experience. I mean, do you want me to give a bit more about, or do you want to introduce the rest of the panel?
No, let me introduce the others, and we'll see how the time goes, if we can have time to expand on that. So next up is Meg Price, who's president of the Worcester Students' Union. She's also highly active in the sector. She's a trustee at HESA. She's a mental health charter assessor at Student Minds. And Meg, you've also even waded into the freedom of speech debate, I think. Meg, I was thinking at our first commission meeting, you said that you'd witnessed real kind of agility and collaboration in universities, and that you wanted to maintain that kind of spirit of co-creation and co-production with students and universities. Do you want to just elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, I think that this year has just shown how well we can work together, and putting students at the centre of everything that we do. So we did that before, but actually being able to kind of be adjustable to the ever-changing circumstances of the pandemic has really brought students and universities as a whole closer together, which I think can only be a positive, and hopefully something that we can build on, like Colin said, moving forwards.
Yeah, no, that must be one really good thing that's come out of the pandemic, and hopefully can be taken forward. Well, it's fantastic to have you on the panel. Now, our third panelist this evening is Nikita Kandwala. Nikita only graduated last summer from the University of Oxford, but she's already smashing it as a senior analyst at LinkedIn, as well as somehow managing her budding side hustle startup called Unbox. Nikita, I think it's fair to say that your passion is for supporting early entrepreneurial careers and new ways of working. So tell me, was Unbox born out of frustration with the career support that you got while you were at university yourself?
I think that, thank you, Mary, first of all. I think it was a combination of frustration out of how universities are currently dealing with career development and boosting employment opportunities for their students. But to be honest, it was also a reaction to the rising unemployment rates that we saw from COVID-19. And I think kind of bringing those two things together, it has really accelerated the need for us to rethink how we're actually preparing students, not just for the workforce, but also for having a happy and productive and successful life. So yeah, that's the story there.
Yeah, and I guess on the commission, you're going to be primarily involved with the kind of rebuilding confidence in future careers. And just very briefly, what kind of support do you think students and graduates most need in this kind of post-pandemic jobs market?
It's a great question. I think there are lots of answers to it, but the three things I'd pick out, I guess, are one, a greater awareness for what the future of work is actually going to look like. The second one is around building the necessary skills at university to thrive in that future of work. And I think the third one is around how can we integrate the academic education that universities are providing students with career development. Right now, they're thought of as two very isolated things. And I'm very curious about how we can actually integrate those to provide students with a more holistic education and to help them thrive that way.
Yeah, brilliant. That again would be a whole panel session on its own. Well, thanks so much, Colin, Meg, and Nikita for joining me this evening. And to everyone listening, please do visit the Student Futures Commission website. If somebody's able to put a link in the chat, that would be fantastic. We've got a call for evidence that's open, and we'd like as many people as possible to contribute thoughts, ideas, stories, anything that will help us pull together the best of thinking in the sector to share with everyone. We'd also like to hear from you if you've got a particular focus area that you might like to contribute a blog on. We've already got experts writing for us about personal finance and substance abuse, for example. So if there's anything particular that you want to contribute, we'd love to hear from you. We've got some public evidence sessions coming up later this month and next month. And some of our commissioners are also running some pop-up mini commissions. For example, Mary Stewart, who's the Vice Chancellor at Lincoln, is leading one on international students. So if you've got an idea to contribute, we've literally got our arms open. We really want the wisdom of the higher ed crowd here. Broadly speaking, we're kind of chunking our thinking into three main areas. So teaching and learning, student experience, and then the kind of careers/employability piece. But we're also keen to look through lots of different lenses. So part-time, full-time, commuter, mature, underrepresented groups, the difference between undergrad and postgrad, home and international, and any other group or niche topic. So please contribute on anything that's of interest to you that you think is might be useful to share with the wider higher education community. We'd really appreciate that. Now, our session this evening is going to focus mainly on kind of re-entry to, I guess, on campus in the autumn. So I think you'll find on your Interact tab that there's a poll open, and we want your thoughts on three different areas. So maximising student success in academic study, a piece on kind of socially reconnecting student experience well-being, and then thirdly, employability and student development. It's a sort of free text poll, and we'll be discussing the things that you're keen to talk about when you've had time to complete it. So please try and keep your posts reasonably succinct to help out our panelists. So the idea is that you're all posting away, I hope. and my panelists will be looking at all your answers. And in the meanwhile, for those of you who weren't able to join our launch or our mobilization, as I like to think of it, our event a week or so ago, I'd like to share with you the results of some of our polling, which was done for us by our partner group GTI using their Sybil platform. So maybe I could have the first slide, please. Let's wait for that to come up. Yeah, if you could just put the next one up, please. That's great. So just to set the parameters, we had over 2,000 respondents from 118 different universities, which was great. And the polling was conducted just last month and covered all different year groups. Great, I think, so I can not quite see the slides, but I think they've caught up with me now. And perhaps I could have the next slide. So on teaching and learning, we found that nearly 2/3 of our respondents thought that they were currently working somewhat or quite far below the academic level that they expected to be at. And I thought that was quite worrying, but I think my instinct is that this, as much as anything, kind of reflects the ebbing of confidence that's come with students working in isolation, you know, without the kind of ready access to the academic community and to their peer groups to kind of share and compare notes with. And I wondered almost whether we need some baseline assessments, not so much to measure lost learning, but more to kind of bolster students' confidence in what they've been able to achieve, despite the fact that they've been working mainly online. But this low confidence in academic achievement, it's reflected in the chart on the bottom left of this slide. That the single biggest thing that students are looking forward to is face-to-face teaching and studying. And then there was another large group saying, excuse me, that they've most missed socializing with their peers. And yeah, I guess we should expect that. And I know, by the way, I know we all know this, but the fact that over 1/4 of students felt that broadband access had made it really difficult to participate in online learning, and another 48% had had somewhat dodgy internet access. It's something that just has to be addressed if we're to have any chance at all of realizing the digital dividend, if you like, that so much learning about what works well during online teaching in the pandemic has made available now. Could I have the next slide, please? So the polling showed that most students really do want a blended future. Although about 30% of them said that they wanted to go back 100% face-to-face, a large majority want some online learning as well as face-to-face, with a little bit of difference about what that balance should be. Recorded lectures are clearly a hit, and I know this is particularly true for international students. But I was quite surprised on this poll that there's a lot of support for people who want, you know, or are happy to use online for tutor sessions or one-to-ones, seminars, and even online group work with other students. So I think as a sector, we've got quite a long way to go, haven't we, in developing a sort of a balance of channels and modes for teaching and learning that provides the choice and the accessibility, and that actually works. And of course, different students will need and want different approaches. I was speaking to someone the other day who said that as many as 80% of their students wanted to stay 100% online, but I think that was reflecting a cohort of mainly mature commuting and part-time students. So clearly different modes for different types of students. For what it's worth, I think we probably at some stage need to ditch the kind of binary divide between face-to-face and online, and recognise that it's actually all learning. And universities who get really good at teaching and learning will have really solid pedagogical principles in the front of their mind, and they'll be looking for the best mix of methods and channels to suit their students and the subjects being taught. Could I have the next slide, please? Wellbeing and community. I think this is perhaps the saddest slide in my deck. You know, more than half of the students in the survey said they'd not participated in any extracurricular activities during the lockdowns. And a large majority said that it had been really difficult to make and maintain friendships. Their concentration and their motivation had been drained, and even that they found it much harder to sleep. You know, that is a very sorry tale, and if you like, it's the kind of the legacy of the pandemic. That students have been lonely, they've been isolated, they've been deprived of that sense of belonging to a really strong and meaningful and diverse community. You know, which are the very things that make the university experience so special for most students, and the things that we perhaps have to work hardest for come the autumn. Could I have the next slide, please? So I think this is the last slide in the deck, and perhaps the most important one on employability, given the government's narrative and recent progress in widening participation, which I think has really strengthened the link in students' minds between going to university and the potential that gives them to to get a better job and to look forward to a better career. But as we were saying earlier, you know, the changes to how we live our lives and how we work as a result of the pandemic, you know, they're yet to be fully realized. And, you know, many of us already well into our careers, or pretty much towards the end of it, like me, you know, we're wondering how everything's going to settle down. So I think it's not really surprising that students in our survey are wobbling on this. You know, their confidence in the job market is dented, and their desire for job security is heightened. But the poll also showed that at the same time, they're thinking more about greater purpose, having social impact in their working lives, looking forward to perhaps to flexible working and flexible location. So I think this is a really big question for the higher education sector, is how do we prepare students for a graduate employment life that even we can't fully envisage now? Or can we prepare them better to shape and have agency in creating their own futures? So lots of interesting stuff there. So I'm going to stop there. I think that was the last slide, so we can probably, we've stopped slide sharing now. That's great. Thank you very much. And I'm hoping that my panelists have had time to scour through your comments in the polling. I'm just trying to find it myself, and tell us what's front of everybody's minds. So if I may, let's start with teaching and learning. Colin, can you tell us what our audience has been saying in the poll here, and what jumps out for you?
Yes, I'm just seeing what's coming through from the audience, but perhaps if I could just say a few words to put it into context, and perhaps encourage people to put a few comments in. I mean, yeah, let's be honest, this has been an incredibly difficult year for both students and staff. And one of the things, I mean, at Queen Mary, we pride ourselves as being one of the most inclusive universities. But what this pandemic has shown, and we all know, is the inequalities that are embedded within our society. And we see that through the pandemic. When I look at our students specifically, you know, some were really struggling because they just didn't have the equipment. We talked about the Wi-Fi access, the broadband access. I've had students that were sitting on the end of a bed trying to engage through an online lecture. Now, of course, I did everything I could possibly do, making sure that students had the right equipment, trying to ship out equipment where that was appropriate. But I made sure that these campuses were still open, that they were open, the facilities were available. I lost sleep about the well-being, health of our students, make sure that if they were struggling, they could come onto campus and use the facilities, as I say, that were kept open through the lockdown stages. But one of the things we talk about confidence, I mean, one of the things from our students and our staff, they were absolutely fantastic. The resilience and the adaptability was just absolutely brilliant. And these are skills that are key to a future career and future employment market, which we don't know what the employment market's going to be. Again, as we previously said, that's going to be continually changing. But those skills of resilience and adaptability are skills that we should really harness, that our students have actually gained. All our education has been co-created with our students, and that is so important going forward. Even through the sort of lockdown period, as we pivoted to the online and pure online learning, that was all co-created with our students, and I would encourage all universities to do that, making sure that we listen to the needs of our students and the concerns from our students. And that's two-way communication. I'm sure Meg is going to pick up some of this, but at Queen Mary, that was two-way communication through our Students' Union, through the student staff liaison committee, through town hall meetings. And it was looking at the needs of all our students and types of students, our commuter students, our students that were distributed all over the UK, our students that stayed on campus during the lockdown period, and of course our students that were all over the world. And it was making sure that we met the needs of all those students going forward. And the engagement online we have seen has absolutely been fantastic. And to just give you two examples, I mean, I was talking to a number of our lecturers, and one of them was saying when they had a face-to-face lecture in front of 150 students, they were lucky to have one question or one person to raise their hand and be brave enough to raise their hand. Online, they got 110 questions from the students. So that engagement and that confidence, if you like, to raise questions was absolutely fantastic, and something, again, we should harness going forward and make sure we take the best bits from that online. Another example was our student societies. They found it was much easier to get external speakers to come and talk to the students through the online platforms. But let's be honest about this. The things that everyone missed, both staff, students, everything we miss is the social interaction. We try and do as much of that as possible through online, but actually that face-to-face, because, you know, when we are engaging online, it's a one-dimensional form of communication. We're missing that sort of reacting, and that's something that as well going forward. And that's something we just need to make sure going forward, that we do encourage, if you like, the students to develop their emotional intelligence on that face-to-face and the communication skills that is required. And of course, interaction online, it can be very lonely. And I was very concerned about our students and making sure that, you know, they felt well looked after. But again, it comes back to loneliness, it comes back to confidence, because when you come off an online lecture, or you come off an online interaction or a study group, you know, you miss that interaction as you're walking out the door, that engagement that you have with your fellow students and with staff and students. So again, that's something we have missed. Of course, going through the COVID period and the lockdown period, we tried to put on as much face-to-face activity as we could. And of course, that was appreciated by our students. But thinking about going forward, I think all universities and us, which was embedded within our strategy before the COVID pandemic, is looking at blended learning, but we like to call it a mixed mode approach. So actually taking the best parts from the online experience and the best parts from the face-to-face, and making sure that we harness all that for the best possible education and the best possible experience. The thing, of course, that the students are crying out for, which I totally appreciate, is that social interaction, that the non-curricular activities, the parties, which of course they weren't going on during COVID. I won't mention too many about the ones that did go on, but making sure that we have that environment so that people can meet each other. Here at Queen Mary, we got 162 nationalities on our campuses, and I say, where else can you meet so many different people from different backgrounds, different traditions, different cultures? And our students have missed that. We tried as much as we can to make sure that that's happened within their study groups, but really they've missed out the meeting of the students across the campus. The support that we're putting in place, and I think all universities are looking at this, is the new students coming in. Of course, most universities, including Queen Mary, the student journey starts as soon as they apply to us. So looking after those students, putting that extra support in, making sure that they got that support and confidence as they come onto our campus. Our returning students, making sure that we put as much face-to-face activities, the opportunities to meet people across campus, and then our graduating students. So what we've done there is making sure that our careers advice is actually extended for 3 years after they graduate to help them find employment going forward. Yeah. I'll pause there.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I mean, to be honest, hats off to you, Colin. I'm sure that with the rest of your leadership team, it's been an incredibly challenging time, and it's been so heartening to see what you and people like you have actually managed to do in incredibly difficult circumstances. So I'm just looking at some of the comments coming through, and how worried are you, Colin, about the fact that your school leavers joining the university this September, might have had very different coverage of the normal curriculum at A level or BTECs or whatever they've been studying. I'm kind of figuring that there's probably quite a small proportion of courses where you've got a direct build on a known piece of curriculum that you've probably had in your minimum entry requirements, and that for the most part, it's going to be the loss of the kind of maturing and the social and emotional and kind of intellectual maturing that's gone on in sixth form, rather than, are you worried about specific patchy loss of curriculum?
There's two things. One, of course, is the emotional development, if you like, because, of course, they haven't had the interaction, the social interaction, as they've gone through 17, 18, and then on to university. And that's something on our student services, student support, we're making sure, and working with our students' union, we're putting as much support around that as we possibly can. And I think everyone is worried about that. On the actual academic side, we're always concerned, even taking COVID out of it, about the different levels sometimes that students come in with, and making sure that we pick that up and provide support to students that perhaps have just missed a bit of the curriculum, especially around things like mathematics. And we're looking this year to put additional support in place, but also to try and ensure that the students realise that we're trying to help them through that first semester, to make sure that we pick up any areas that they don't feel comfortable with or confident about, that we would need to move very quickly to put additional support in place. Yeah. So we're looking to try and be as flexible as possible, but understand that actually we will probably need to put on additional support, but every year we do put that support in place.
Yeah, no, I'm sure that's the case. And just before I come on to Meg, it was really interesting hearing your what you were saying about the lectures, where you suddenly had 110 out of 150 students kind of actually asking a question because they were online. Are there other aspects of the kind of online teaching and learning experience where you thought, oh wow, we've got to grab and embed that in the way we do things going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been, and we can go back 10, 15 years, I've always been a fan of flipped lectures. So when you have the large lecture, actually that's online, that's recorded. And then you're looking at small groups to really start to dissect what was discussed in the lecture, to really make sure you understand it. But also that's critical thinking, if you like, critical challenge. Because when you look at our students and when you look at the students, what makes a Queen Mary student unique? It's the creativity, it's the problem solving, it's the communication skills. It's making sure you've got all those skills as well as your academic knowledge in your area. Those skills that are adaptable for any career that you would like to follow. And I think it's important that we tried as hard as we can to try and make sure that our students gain those skills through the COVID period, through online, but some of that does need to be done face to face.
Yeah, good. Well, thank you very much. So let's come on to Meg. Meg, can you actually see the comments in the Slido, or do you need me to do a bit of translating for you?
If you could, Mary, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, no, okay. So we have a comment here saying many students will have lost some ability to learn together and to interact face to face and to socialize. Others are going to be like uncorked champagne. And this person is saying that both those kinds of students need support to transition to a productive level of socialization and interaction. Does that sound like the kind of thing that you've been thinking about in the student union, and how you're going to support students, both returning students and the new intake?
Yeah, and I think that there's quite a spectrum of student, to be honest. So I think they're the two ends, and that actually students kind of sit along that and can slide up and down that given the situation. And I've been really thinking about induction in particular as a really key point for all students, so not just first and second years. But I think that looking back, that sometimes we've made assumptions about students' abilities to work together as well. And about how we use this time period to actually recognise the differences in ability and help address those in terms of team working. So it's not just about content, but about process and about recognising the strengths and weaknesses within teams and things like that. That actually is some of the really valuable things for employability as well. And what you said about the champagne cork, I had a conversation with my Vice-Chancellor yesterday, and he said students are going to want to really live in September, aren't they? And I completely agree that there will be a lot of students, and actually it's about how you create opportunity for them to uncork and to have fun in a really safe and kind of positive way. And I think that's where universities really come in terms of supporting their students' unions or their events teams to help make sure that students can feel like they're making up for that lost time as well, because like you said at the beginning, Mary, it's a really transformative time, not just in the classroom, but also outside of the classroom as well, and about how we just create opportunities for them to make those memories as well.
Yeah, no, that's right. And by the way, I read your blog this morning on Wonky. I highly recommend it for anyone who hasn't already read it. And one of the things you mentioned there was the importance of support for developing friendships and social connections. And also I thought it was really nice, you said something about, I think, developing a culture of care and kindness on campus. And I wondered whether you wanted to say a bit more about that, and how do you do that?
I think it's something that has actually really grown in the pandemic. I think that we've all been more conscious of how we look out for each other. And I think that's something that we kind of need to really consciously try and retain, particularly when we go back to a lot of more in-person things, but also recognizing blended approaches, how some people might feel like they're missing out on things, and about, I think it's a culture thing, and I think it's a long-term thing, but actually it's what higher education is good at. We just kind of need to highlight how we create it. And I think there's a lot of stuff to do with that in terms of student groups. I think student groups are built on care, and things like personal academic tutor relationships are built on care and consideration, and just about how we highlight good practice in those areas and share it amongst the sector. So as well as within an institution, but actually wider within a sector. So what can student groups learn from in the classroom, and the other way around as well, in terms of developing teams and a really good culture and ethos as well.
Yeah. It's interesting, there's a comment on the poll from someone who says, don't overprotect our students, treat them as resilient adults. And I think there will be a balance, won't there, to strike between, you know, making sure that students do have a sense of self-efficacy and agency, but also feel that they belong to their communities. I think you also said something about that in your blog, about deepening connections with the local communities. Actually, I don't know if you heard Sunday Blake from Exeter SU on one of the earlier sessions, who said that one of the sort of moments when people really felt that they belonged to their university community was when they started to volunteer. Is that something you've observed as well?
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's something about how students can often be seen as an outsider within a community, and that, particularly if you don't have, say, a very large campus, or that campus is outside of a city. But actually, when we utilize the talents and the skills and the energy of students to do civic work, it becomes not only beneficial for the people that they're doing the work for, so the community, but actually for the students themselves. And I know, even from my personal experience, my engagement with the community was actually one of the things that kept me at university, but also developed the skills to help me move forwards and to develop in my degree.
Yeah. No, it's really great to hear that. And just so one other point, I mean, obviously student support services, have always been there in all universities, but so is there a sense first that student support, there's going to be a lot more demand on student support services, and how do you do that really well with very large numbers of students, and what's the student union role in student support services as opposed to more general support?
I really like the Student Minds approach of a whole university approach, because I think that the mental health crisis is still developing, and I think it will continue to do so for years to come, regardless of how COVID goes. And actually, everyone has a role to play in it. And I think one really key one for me and for many students' unions is about upskilling other students to support each other and to signpost and to kind of help support students before it gets to the point where they need professional support. And that social facilitation is something that can help support positive well-being amongst students. And I just really think that student unions have a really key part to play in terms of the volume of students that have had a difficult time this year, and about getting them to be in a positive place. Yeah,
indeed. Well, it's going to be challenging, no doubt. I do have, I think, Colin, you said, how amazingly resilient our students have been, and I don't think we should underestimate what they're capable of when we bring them back and ask them to kind of join a community that's helping to kind of rebuild in a certain way, and indeed to help each other when people are struggling. Good. Okay, now I'm going to move on to Nikita. Nikita, are you also unable to see the the blog.
Yes,
Let me just
do
see.
a little bit of translation, that would be lovely.
Yeah, okay. I've also got, no, shush. My dog reckons it's nearly his supper time. He's come and started whining at me, so I might have to, well, I won't go off and feed him in the middle of the session, don't worry about that. Okay, so development and employability. So somebody here is saying that we should spell out the wider employability attributes that each module intends to develop, and self-assessment of students before and after, helping students gain awareness, articulate their skill set and match them to employment roles. So yeah, I think I've always had this idea, because we say, don't we, in the university sector, that whatever you're studying, you learn lots of fantastic transferable skills, and I've always had an idea that some of our students need a bit of help in spotting the transferable skills and learning how to transfer them, and who on earth to transfer to. Does what are your thoughts on the kind of amount of embedded employability stuff in university degrees?
Yeah, I think it's a great comment and a really good question, Mary, because I'm going to use a little analogy here that I think spells out really well. But right now, as both a kind of recent graduate and as someone who's working in the talent space in the corporate world, I've realized that career development at university is a bit like an impulse buy at the end of a shopping experience. And what I mean by that is it's something that's kind of tagged on at the end of your university experience, in a very sort of, oh my goodness, I'm graduating now, I must get some help from the career service or the alumni office to figure out what on earth it is I want to do for the rest of my life. Now, obviously, that's putting it a little bit dramatically, but the point is, I think that by making very specific changes to how we integrate career development into the curriculum at universities and the wider academic experience, we could really progress in improving how effective universities are at not just improving graduate employment outcomes, but also providing students, as I said before, with that holistic education. And I think it says a lot that both Meg and Colin, when they were talking about teaching and learning and student wellbeing and support, both spoke to the importance of real world experience in the curriculum and during the overall university experience. You know, Meg spoke about how important doing that kind of civic action work was for keeping her at university and making the experience even more valuable for her. And so I think that there are a couple of universities that are doing a great job of this. For example, the London Interdisciplinary School, which is a challenger university, is doing a fantastic job at integrating project-based learning into the curriculum. So those transferable skills that we talk about, whether it's effectively communicating or building a personal brand or understanding how to actually learn, all of those things can be achieved if we think about career development in the context of what are we actually teaching at university and how are we teaching it?
Yeah, that's really, by the way, I was listening to you, even though I had to dash out and try and close the door so you don't have to listen to my dog barking. And so just take this a step further. Do you think that there should be embedded and mandatory and assessed curriculum in degree courses around this stuff?
I think assessment is an interesting one, to be honest, that I haven't really thought about that much. I think in terms of whether it's compulsory or not, I think rather than thinking about it as in, is this an option for students or is this something we should make compulsory? It's more that every employability skill, every transferable skill that students are going to need to thrive in the future of work is something that regardless of the path they choose, they're going to be required to have a handle on. So gone are the days, as we all know, where for any application to a job, you need to send in a generic cover letter and duplicate your one-page CV. You know, your online portfolio of experience has replaced the cover letter and your LinkedIn has replaced the CV. So today, it's a lot more about being proactive and figuring out how you can stand out in the job market. And I think in order to empower students to actually have the know-how and skills to do that, we need to be focusing on, for every student, regardless of what they're studying, regardless of whether they're doing undergrad or postgrad, how do you build effective relationships? How do you network? How do you communicate? And I think currently, you know, this was all happening before COVID. COVID has just highlighted and accelerated these changes. But right now it does feel a little bit like we're teaching tomorrow's skills. I mean, yesterday's skills to tomorrow's workers. And actually what we need to be doing is teaching the skills for the digital age, because, you know, parts of our university system, as we know, are built for 100 years ago. And figuring out how we can equip students for the future of work is one part of the system that we really can't afford to compromise on, particularly now, Mary, as you said earlier, when students are more worried than ever about job security, yes, but they're also really concerned about how they can build a meaningful and fulfilling career that has impact. So I think we really owe it to young people to figure out how we can do this more effectively.
Yeah, that's you're preaching to the converted as far as I'm concerned. Somebody on the poll has said that we should be offering additional free standalone modules outside of the subject area. And actually, I think there's a couple of things here. So one is the kind of political narrative at the moment about so-called low-value degrees and not wanting people to do kind of arts and humanities subjects because they're not, you know, they haven't got a golden thread tied to, you know, a technical type job at the end of it. And then I was talking to somebody last night who was saying there's so much really high quality professional development, you know, kind of short courses on, you know, whether it's Future Learn or other platforms. And that actually one of the things we need is for QAA to kind of level and give credits to some external stuff so that it's kind of available off the shelf to bring into university curriculum as, you know, as options for people. Does that make sense to you? Do you think to kind of just kind of make sure that there's a bit of a smorgasbord of really practical skills that people can pick up as well as their deep degree learning?
I have to say I love that idea. I think of it as a bit of a pick and mix, you know. You can kind of stack together professional skills and courses from different providers. And if universities were to actually give students credits for those things, that would not only incentivize the students to think about their futures, but it would also give them the really solid foundational skills they needed to thrive in their career. And to speak to your kind of first point, Mary, about social sciences and arts degrees and not having that golden thread tied to them, I'd love to speak to my own personal experience a bit about that, because I studied Spanish and linguistics at university, and I'm now working in data at a big tech company a year after graduating. I think that more than anything speaks to the reality that we're seeing in the world of work, which is that there really is no such thing anymore as a linear career. I think it's very common for Gen Zers and millennials to spend just 2 to 3 years in one job or on one career path before switching out and doing something else. And I think actually knowing that we are entering this age of independent working and young people kind of building that autonomy and carving their own path is a really critical part of this debate, because we need to take into account the fact that actually what young people prioritize right now when thinking about their careers is impact, autonomy, and flexibility. And what we should be doing is preparing them with the skills so that they can actually craft those paths themselves, rather than thinking in a very kind of outdated fashion that they're going to graduate into one company and then spend 50 years of their career there, because quite frankly, that's just not the reality. So yeah, I don't think the linear career exists much anymore. And it's really, really crucial that that forms a part of this debate, I think.
Yeah. Colin, did you want to comment on some of the things that Nikita's been putting forward, and actually particularly whether you've considered this idea of kind of bringing external modules in to kind of wrap around some of the core degree content at Queen Mary?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, totally agree, the linear career. I mean, I keep on telling our students, you know, what's the job market going to look like in 5-10 years' time? I can only say one thing for certain: I do not know. The job market is always going to change, and it's important that you've got the skills to change with it. And we make sure that those skills are embedded within our curriculum, as well as the extracurricular stuff that people can do, the volunteering with our local community, entrepreneur skills. But we're also looking, exactly as you just said, Mary, and you picked up, about short courses. We're developing CPD courses, and we're developing them with companies as well, specifically for employers from their companies, but also we can use them for our students as well. So these are short courses. How we integrate them within a curriculum, we're looking at that, making sure that the students can get credit. Just one thing I would say about employability: to me, employability needs to be embedded with everything we do. It's not tacked on. And I mean, I agree with you of being a bit sort of old-fashioned about CV, but I actually encourage our students to start to develop and write their CV in the first day they join us, to find where the gaps are. And where the gaps are, then look at all the opportunities you've got outside your course, the opportunities that this university, and whether you're in another university, the opportunities that are available to you to fill those gaps in and get that experience. You know, it's fantastic. I mean, 3-year degree, people keep on knocking it, but you've got 3 years to gain so much experience, and the world is your oyster afterward. You know, the degree that you get is a passport for you to do anything you want, both in the UK and globally. And I love the way that you talk about project-based learning. This is something I'm really passionate about. I'm passionate about problem-based, project-based, inquiry-based learning. I think it should all be embedded within the curriculum. You know, I really do not think that the way to teach students anymore is to stand up in a big lecture theatre and talk to the students. It's all about engagement, but it's all about real life problems. And the feedback I get from students, unfortunately, I don't teach anymore because I run the university and I haven't got the time, but I just miss it so much. The way that I used inquiry-based learning, the students loved it, loved those real life problems. The trouble is, on their projects, they just wrote too much and my marking was just too extensive. So I had to find another way through that.
Fantastic. I sometimes wonder, you know, when everyone says that problem solving is such an important employability skills, and yet there's no way you can search for which degree gives you the best problem solving outcomes, you know, regardless of subject. There's no kind of link that you can't search for that on UCAS, for example. Meg, what do you think about students' confidence about the job market? Because my sense is actually that the graduate job market is bouncing back already, and that it's getting more buoyant again, and that, you know, people are actually wanting to recruit again. But are your colleagues, you know, just really depressed about whether they're going to be able to get jobs, or are they feeling a bit more bobbish about it all?
I think there's a really important part around emotional resilience. I think from the people that I've spoken to are currently looking for graduate roles, of that it can be quite demoralizing to not hear anything back quite a lot of the time, which is kind of really difficult emotionally, rather than necessarily the physical part of actually applying for jobs. And I just really liked what Nikita said in terms of with employability being like bolted on, but also around, like, I'm really passionate about articulating some of the experiences that people already have and maximising what they can take from that in terms of employability. So I think that students' unions have a massive job in terms of helping students articulate how beneficial their experience is on sports club and society committees, the volunteering that they do and things like that, that really can help them sort of achieve and get these roles when they go for them as well.
Yeah, and I can see we're all kind of smiling, you know, this is giving us all kind of warm feelings about what we can do for our students. I'm keeping a close eye on the time, and we've got 3 minutes left. So I'm just going to ask each of you, if you wouldn't mind, to suggest, you know, one thing from any of the areas that we've talked about that you think is either the most important or that would make the most difference for student success. I would ask you to look at the poll, but none of you can see it, so I won't help you out there. You'll have to delve into your own imaginations. Who shall I come to? Nikita, what do you think's the single thing that would make the most difference for students coming back after this long period of isolation?
Single thing, it's a tough one, Mary. I think I would say, though, that making students aware of all the opportunities out there is going to be really, really critical. Currently, the scale is very much tilted in the favor of big banks, consulting firms, law firms, who have the resources and capital to actually get those stands at careers fairs and do the fancy networking dinners. But at the end of the day, the amount of options and potential career paths, as we've spoken about, that are out there for students is actually incredible.
Yeah.
And post-pandemic, when, as Meg said, anxiety is so high and where emotional resilience is so needed, I think we really, really owe it to students to give them as broad a perspective as possible so that they do have every chance at a happy, productive and successful life.
Brilliant, thank you. Meg, what about you? And you've literally got sort of 45 seconds, if you don't mind keeping it crisp.
Yeah, I would just say opportunities to participate.
Yeah.
I think people have missed out on so much, not for want of trying, but actually around how we enable students to be able to just take on the year and to make the most out of it, really, because I think that students will actually be really keen to do that given the right support.
Brilliant, brilliant. And Colin, the last word for you. What's the one thing that you think would make most difference?
The one thing, I mean, to address, I mean, to just show the resilience and adaptability that students have already got, but to actually bring them back, to make them feel a part of a community. As much as we tried online, I think we've missed that bit of community, a part of the community of the university, have that confidence, but to be able to meet the people right across the university, and to really understand that actually the students have done a fantastic job and actually they are ready for the employment market, and just making sure that they feel at home when they come back onto campus.
Fantastic. I completely agree that there's something about giving confidence back to our students, and with that bit of confidence, I think that they'll be able to bounce back. Listen, you've all been fantastic panelists, particularly as you didn't have access to the things that you were supposed to be kind of feeding your thoughts. So thank you so much for joining us this evening, and of course thanks to everyone who's listening. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and please do visit the UPPF Foundation Student Futures Commission website and find out how you can contribute to our work. Thanks so much, everyone.